What is it like to build a career in science and research? What skills would you have to hone? And how do you choose what to work on when there are so many things that you can work on in science? Jonathan would say patience, persistence, and humility are key variables to your success in that question. Today, Jonathan D. Madison is the program director for the Metals and Metallic Nanostructures program in the Division of Materials Research at the National Science Foundation. He's been with NSF since 2021, but prior to that, he has an extensive career in research and development and as a scientist, including Sandia National Laboratories, as well as many other places that you might have heard. As you check out his bio, one of the things that you'll quickly notice is how diverse and also creative his strategy and approach has been. And in fact, the thing that I was also impressed as a non-scientist getting to know Jonathan was just how his passion and curiosity to connect the dots and really find common grounds across different industries was the secret sauce in how he built many bridges that he has today. It's no wonder that many have recognized him under one of the best scientists and most promising scientists in the industry to look out for early on throughout his career consistently. So, what are you waiting for? Let's dive into the conversation, learn about how Jonathan built his career in science and research as we continue to celebrate Black History Month of Black innovators around the world. Let's dive in. One of the things I was so inspired is in your journey getting into science and, of course, government work. And just to be direct, let's break it down. What does it even mean in layman's term of what a metals program and NSF's Division of Materials Research is all about and what your role is as a program director?
Sure, yeah. So I manage the Metals and Metallic Nanostructures program. And so what that means is I manage NSF's merit review process for all proposals that come in focused on fundamental metals research and evaluate them for their opportunity in terms of investment, what science can come out of it, and ultimately help make recommendations on what science gets funded and gets the opportunity to be pursued.
Thank you so much for that. I had a chance to, share your story a little bit earlier before we kick started. I am still very curious. I mean, your resume is so impressive and inspiring, but there must have still been a very starting point of like, geez, like young Jonathan thinking about, I want to get into science one day. Do you remember when that might have been for you?
I do actually. It's a yeah. I mean, it's a pretty interesting story. So I, developed a passion for STEM and science when I learned that I had an opportunity to have my, get some scholarship money to go to school to actually pay for it because I had no money by majoring in science, technology, engineering, and math. So choosing a STEM field actually provided a way for me to have my education paid for and be able to finance it when I had no other means to really do so. So it really created an opportunity for me that I was happy to pursue. I had good grades in high school in science and math, and so I was okay. But I really developed a passion pretty quickly when I realized it was an opportunity and a path towards being able to do something more that I had no means to pursue otherwise.
But to still build on that, science is just such a broad field as well. Like even with that, was there still like an early moment of like, geez, like this part of science, or like maybe one day I want to have a job like something.
Mhm. So when I was an undergrad actually,
Uh-huh.
and I had the opportunity to intern in the summers. And so the summer of my sophomore year, I interned at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington D.C.
Ah.
actually, and I had a mentor who was a metallurgist. His name is Dr. George Spanos, and he really introduced me to metallurgy, and it was exciting. He introduced me to the iron carbon phase diagram, and I learned, man, this is the underpinnings of so many things that we depend on today, right? Bridges, cars, structural materials, skyscrapers, right? I mean, the things that we've built our modern world out of, a lot of these things are based in metals. And so it was extremely exciting. And it was just eye-opening that I could be
Mm.
able to play a role in identifying, potentially the next, set of materials that we might make something out of someday. And so to me, that was extremely captivating, extremely exciting. And that's really what fueled my interest to be not just in science general, but specifically in metals and metallurgy.
I see. And again, excuse me, because I'm newer to the field, and like many of our listeners, I'm learning about it. I'm curious because I think so much has changed in science and technology in the past, few decades. And so, what the beginning of when Jonathan started that, of like, geez, I want to dive more into it, to now when you're actually leading and seeing so many of the initiatives, I'm curious, like, what's been kind of the biggest changes? Like, is it the way how we use metals? Is the way how we understand it? Like, I'm curious, like, for somebody who's like learning about it for the first time, like, yeah, what has changed? Like, what's so cool about being in the space now?
Sure. I think that's a great question. So, the one of the basic items that's so exciting about science and research specifically is that you're literally learning new things. And so, what I think in many cases we know a lot about metals to some degree, but what we're able to learn in terms of the specificity and the details, we're able to get much more closer to a lot of the intricate details that we had no way of seeing or observing. For decades, people theorized certain things, but we're just now getting to the point where we can actually see some of those things and actually experimentally observe them. That's super exciting, right? And in some cases, these observations lead to discoveries in which we found out the theory is not quite right or not quite what we thought it was,
Yeah.
right? These are very exciting discoveries because it then opens the door to ways that we might be able to optimize or use materials, specifically metals, in ways we didn't anticipate or know that we could.
Are there
Right.
some
And so
examples you can share?
let's see. So, for example, one of my areas that when I was on the bench doing work, we were doing a three-dimensional reconstruction. So, looking at how microstructure, the very smallest elements of metals, how they form, how they exist, and how they evolve. And we found when we can look at a material in 3 dimensions,
Yeah.
we actually found out some of our observations from looking at things in 2 dimensions were incorrect. Right. For example. One of my mentors was looking at laths. This is getting very technical, but looking at laths that intersect grain boundaries, right? And so when you look at something in 2D, right, you see something. So maybe to make it simple, right, if you're looking at a ball and you were to cut it in half, right, you would see a circle, right? And so you might hypothesize like, oh yeah, so I cut this material lots of places and there's circles everywhere. And so there's nothing but rods going through the whole thing because they're all circles. Everywhere I cut is circles. But if you can look at it in 3D, then you might see, well, these aren't just rods. These are actually spheres, right? And so when you begin to try to understand how something will break, how something can move, how something can bend, right? The way rods respond is very different than the way circles will respond, right? And so that's just one example, extremely simplified, in which we're able to learn more about materials that sometimes debunks previous theories, but then informs how we might use a material in the future with a more accurate understanding of how it actually exists in the world.
Very cool. I think at least definitely with the 2D, 3D example, that's something many could relate. And so I think it's good that we got to geek out a little bit and learn a little bit more about the fun field you're in. Taking a step back, going back into your chapter of your journey. So, okay, great. Like that's a cool industry. I want to maybe explore. And then after that, I believe you got a chance to also work at Sandia National Lab for about 11 years in New Mexico. How was it like working at a national lab, which is also in itself a very unique opportunity and a little different where you are now, which we will get there in a little bit, but bring us back to how that experience was for those who's probably like, I don't even know what that means. Like, what does it mean to work at a national lab? What are even the type of jobs and what are the skills that was important? And so bring us back to what happened there.
Yeah, so Sandia is a FFRDC, Federally Funded Research Development Center. There's several across the country, and they all have various missions and activities. And so I won't talk too much about Sandia's mission per se. People can look it up. But in terms of my interaction, I got the opportunity to work on a variety of different applications, a variety of different material systems, and got to use literally world-class tools, and equipment to do so. And so I think one of the things that national laboratories provide, just in general, they provide a really great opportunity to work on things that are focused on some national, interest, right? Something that is in contribution to, the larger whole, but they typically bring together persons that are experts across so many different fields because national labs cover so many different spaces and expertise areas, but they also are spaces that have tremendous resources in terms of equipment, and labs, right? And so oftentimes academic researchers will partner with persons at national laboratories because they can provide access to
Mm.
certain equipment that maybe they don't have themselves. So I think maybe the biggest takeaway, I think, from my time at Sandia is I really got an opportunity to work on a lot of different things,
Mhm.
but to do it with some really, really fantastic, outstanding scientists across so many different fields, and to do so with extremely advanced and up to date equipment. So I mean, it was an amazing experience.
That's really, really cool. And I can imagine also a lot of different skills and also experiences that you built. Tell us, for instance, like looking back at that time, who were people who inspired you probably to lead you to continuing the path where you are?
Interesting. So I've been very fortunate. I've had some really, really amazing mentors through my life, and any success I've had,
Yeah.
I really credit it to them because they were always able
Mhm.
to see beyond where I was at currently and get me to think a little bit bigger. And so I think one important piece to maybe identify, appreciate, and maybe even to give acknowledgement to is that although I've picked up new mentors along the way as I've continued my professional journey, those mentors that I had, in the beginning and along each stage, they continue to be tremendous resources to me
Mm.
in my life. So, for example, I had an
Mhm.
undergraduate research advisor,
Yeah.
and he was instrumental in helping me, figure out grad
Mm.
school and what to do
Mhm.
next. And then when I went to undergrad, when I left undergrad and went to, grad school, I have an amazing thesis advisor that helped me, plot a path, not just understanding things technically and developing myself as a scientist, but also figuring out what to do in terms of a career. And then, even in between those times, all the internships and opportunities I had, I gained a lot of additional mentors. So it wasn't so much that I picked up a new mentor per se at Sandia, or I mean, I worked with several people that were fantastic, and
Yeah.
several people did become mentors. But I think I've developed a cadre of mentors just along the way, and at each juncture of my life, they've been so helpful in helping me navigate what those next steps are. So it's hard to say pick one because I've just collected, I think, so many along the way. But they've been with me the whole time, and they've been so instrumental in every turn and every evolution of my
Mm.
career.
That's amazing. And I know, which we'll get a chance to dig a little bit deeper, which is why, probably related to why you are also very dedicated to mentoring and giving back, and why you care so much about the equity and making sure we have more different voices in this industry, in this field overall, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But thank you so much for sharing that. It's a reminder that, mentors are everywhere and we should proactively build those relationships. Um, Building on it, I'm also curious because one of the things as you've highlighted, and I think I also relate because when I worked in the nuclear weapons security in my previous role, before I started my business for Innovators Box, working with a lot of different people are exciting, but also can be a challenge because that brings different personalities. Different people are passionate about different perspectives, who are very gung ho about their opinions. What has helped you, looking back, navigate those different conversations and problem solving when you're working in such a high end creative ideation space? Because it could very easily go to a different path that we don't want, of
Sure,
conflict.
sure.
What skills has helped you?
Yeah, having a lot of conversations actually. So
Ah,
I've when I was younger, I was a very shy child. I didn't like
really?
talking so much. Yeah, um, I was nervous, and but I got a lot of practice at it. And my parents were always, talking to people and working with others and helping others do things. So there were a lot of people in our house, and
Uh-huh.
I just got the opportunity to talk to a lot of people from a young age, right? And so, all those experiences were like a little nerve wracking. I developed. I developed a skill set to learn how to talk to people. And one of the skills that I think I developed very early on was learning how to find common ground. Right. So we may be very different. Everyone's different in
Yeah.
different regards, but in almost every scenario, if you are thoughtful enough, if you are creative enough, and if you can listen, well enough, you
Yeah.
can identify and find commonalities, things that you share that are of interest. Right. And so that was one skill that I think I developed very early that has served me tremendously through my career, right? No matter how difficult the conversation is, right? No matter what challenge the topic, have to broach, or maybe how big, right? You need to think to maybe to overcome a challenge.
Yeah.
Finding some commonality and common ground, it lets you begin to build rapport. And then once you build rapport, then you can have a path to maybe move forward. And so, that is one huge skill that was tremendous, and learning how to find common ground. I think another skill that I developed along the way was learning how to ask good questions. So my thesis advisor, we had many conversations, but one conversation that just sticks in my memory that I will cherish, to this day. I was on a campus visit for graduate school. Coming out of undergrad and going to pursue graduate school, and there was a campus visit, and we were having it was like all the prospective students, and then potential mentors, and it was a dinner, and it was a banquet speaker, all this stuff, and we were talking because we were sitting at the same table, and I asked her, it's like, you're extremely accomplished. I mean, you're there. Obviously, I would want to come to this huge university, Go Blue. I would obviously want to come here. It's clear why I would want to come here. But I mean, what is it in me that you think would make me a good fit, or someone that you would want to take on as a student, right? And she said, well, you ask good questions. Having a deep and scientific curiosity, that's not something that you can teach. And so that really, really stuck with me. And so I've always endeavored to ask good questions, no matter the scenario, no matter the environment I'm in, because you can always learn something from someone else. And thirdly, this is getting a pretty long answer, but the third like skill that I picked up is really just is not so much a skill as it is a way of being, which is remaining humble and realizing that no matter how much you acquire, no matter how much you may learn, there's always going to be someone that's smarter. And it should be your mission to not stay in spaces where you're the smartest person. It should be your mission to get to spaces where you're not the smartest person, and you can learn something from someone else. Because if you're the smartest person, then you're probably not learning in that room, right? So if I'm the smartest person in the room, then I'm making my goal to get out of that room and to get into another room where I can learn, so I can continue to grow and continue to advance, right? And so staying humble, it keeps you open to being able to learn from others and not think that you have the answer all the time.
I love that. I mean, finding common ground, asking good questions, being humble. I mean, that's the mantra that I know many of our listeners would resonate very much. And I think it's a powerful reminder that, I think part of the joy, a chance to have these conversations with so many experts and leaders like you is a reminder that, hey, we might all be in different fields, but there's a lot of beautiful commonality of what it makes to the quality to be consistent. All three of those, no matter where people might be heading their career, are going to be truly important and meaningful. And I can actually vet listeners, I've got a chance to experience this firsthand from Jonathan. When we first met in 2023, we were speaking at an event together, and I was so inspired. And I thanked Jonathan deliberately many times, because what happened was we were at a panel together. NSF was recruiting. We'll talk about NSF. I know you're all curious about it still. We're going to get there. And I had a chance to speak about one of the disability innovation projects that I'm working with a team. And I was just really inspired. Jonathan really took the time. I'm I'm a nobody. I'm still also learning in very early stage. But here's Jonathan, taking the time, learning not about me, but all the other panelists who was in the session. And not just emphasizing the stories, but taking the time to research the audience. And the particular event that we were at was Comic-Con, where, it could get very goofy, but also the question how does this connect to science? And there, you might be surprised, a lot of things, because if you see comic, there's a lot of science and technology introduced and how we get into fan. And the slides and storytelling Jonathan prepared in helping make sure that we had a very thoughtful, very deep conversation immediately was all possible because the three and many things he just highlighted, he does it by practice. So just want to back it up, and how I was inspired to want to have him back to have a deeper conversation here. So let's now dive into finally, what is NSF? Because after your wonderful time at Sandia, and building all these skills and having these aha moments, you had also then made that transition to NSF. Was NSF something in your radar for a while? And what does NSF even stand for those who are new and learning about this for the first time?
Sure. No, I really appreciate the question. So NSF stands for the National Science Foundation. And just a little bit of history. So NSF as an agency is very unique within the government because it's the only agency that is established explicitly for the purpose of science. And so NSF's mission is to promote the progress of science, to advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and to secure the national defense and for other purposes. That was the language that was provided in 1950 in the Congressional Act that erected the National Science Foundation. To translate that into today's terms, what does that mean? That means NSF fundamentally promotes science by investing in research to expand our knowledge in the areas of science, engineering, and education. And so, it is not, funding science and education isn't something that, NSF does in the side. That is our core business. And that is why we exist. And so our director has a few specific, goals and initiatives that he's driving, and specifically these in contribution to the mission. They're specifically looking at advancing research into future means, so in future investments. So how do we enable the technology of tomorrow by investments that we do today? Also accessibility and inclusion, right? Meaning we want to provide opportunity for anyone from any background, anywhere in the country, to be able to contribute to the scientific enterprise, right? And so we do that through our investments. And then thirdly, global leadership, right? It means leading by our values, leading by our commitments, and standing by not just our decisions, but our decisions to make the world a more productive place by science and contributing to the overall good. And so that's what NSF does. That's what NSF's mission is. And that's what, my work at the Science Foundation, National Science Foundation, is in contribution to. I just do it within the sphere specifically of metals research.
Got it. And so why then make that move? I know you were doing a lot of exciting things in India, and how did that opportunity came to you?
Yeah. Again, great question. So, I was, doing my thing. I was happy. I was publishing papers and, doing science, and it was great, and mentoring students, and, but doing kind of, one at a time, and postdocs, and that was fantastic and super, fulfilling. But I got to a point in my career where, you begin to think about impact, right? And you begin to think about what can I do that can be more impactful than what I'm doing now, right? And so I think I was certainly having an impact in science, but working at the National Science Foundation created an opportunity to be able to have a much broader impact. So instead of mentoring one postdoc directly, now through my work as a program director for the Metals and Metallic Nanostructures program, I can potentially make decisions that touch postdocs across the country, right? I literally make help participate in the process that impacts the research that is done across the country and numerous institutions all across the globe. And so I value that, right? And I appreciated that. And so to me, that was a great opportunity to be able to touch science at a broader level, and be a resource, but also a positive and helpful steward for my field in a way that is responsible and is a tremendously awesome responsibility. So I'm happy to be able to participate in that service, and so hopefully I am doing the field well. And my colleagues, appreciate the efforts to steward the program in a way that's helpful to the field.
That's wonderful. And so you came to NSF, I believe, at 2021. Am I remembering correctly?
That's correct.
And so now it's been a few years. Thank you for coming during the pandemic, post-pandemic, like around that time. That's still a big move. Transition, as you mentioned, more responsibilities, more impact. How are you also setting in the city? Because life in New Mexico and then Washington, D.C., greater D.C. area is a little different. I hope you're liking it. I'm in D.C., so.
Monica, yes, it is very different. Cost of living, yes, that's a change. Weather, that's a change. But it's great. I think my wife and I, we have a young daughter, and so the opportunities and things that we're able to expose her to, in the city, in the DMV area, it is just unparalleled. And so, for all the changes, that are a little bit, a higher challenge in terms of, just life,
Yeah.
we count them well worth it, for the opportunities that we're able to expose our daughter to now and participate in ourselves. So it's transition, but it's been a good one. It's been a good one.
Definitely a lot of good museums, so good
Yeah.
to look forward to and be inspired by.
Absolutely.
Going back to your time at NSF, to continue to build on that, tell me, for instance, like what your day-to-day looks like, because the big picture that you shared, I think part of me is like, that's so cool, but also like, oh my gosh, that sounds like a lot of responsibility and very busy as well. So like, how do you make sense of your time? What does your schedule looks like? Bring us there.
Yeah. So a lot of reading. It's a lot and a lot of reading, a lot of writing, and a lot of communicating. Quite frankly, and so communicating everything from responding to PIs who maybe have questions, right, about the process,
What does
or
PI
want to
stand
follow
for?
up.
For those who
Oh
don't
yeah,
know what it is,
yeah, no, great clarification. So principal investigator.
which
And so
means
those are the
what?
names. That's the name. That's the title of the person that is submitting a proposal. The
Got it.
principal
Got it.
investigator for research. And so engaging with principal investigators that maybe are interested in putting in a proposal, or they want to put in a different proposal because they were funded in the past and want to look at something different. And engaging with them to answer their questions, help them navigate the process, processing all the proposals that come in, identifying reviewers, because it's something that may not be apparent to persons that are not familiar with NSF.
Yeah.
Program directors don't have the authority to make awards or not make awards. So we manage the merit review process, which means we identify experts all over the country and all over the world, literally, that are experts in areas that are being proposed to be worked on. And those experts then weigh in on those proposals, and they make assessments, and they say, well, this is really good for this reason. Could be improved for this reason, or this is an answered problem, potentially. And so we source reviewers that then opine on the quality and the merit of the proposals and the science that is suggested. And then we take all of that feedback from all of these reviewers on every proposal, multiple different reviewers, and then make recommendations based upon the feedback we get and the evaluations from the experts that have been provided. And so, NSF is a steward. We're not a dictator. We're helping the field identify what they feel as a field of professionals and trained practitioners in an area feel will be the most cutting edge science and the most impactful investments that can be made. Because fundamentally, right, I mean, there's a lot of great science, but we can't fund everything. And so there's always the item of prioritization. So day to day, I'm managing that process for the field and for all the proposals that come in, as well as working across the agency on other agency-wide activities that require the expertise of a variety of different practitioners in a variety of different fields and different areas.
Got it. Well, tell me more about time, energy, and stress, how you make sense of all of it, and communication, because as you're sharing it, I think those are 4 things coming to mind. Like, how does he fit in 24 hours? I hope he's sleeping. I do think Jonathan sleeps. He has family time too.
Sometimes. I sleep sometimes. Yeah.
So tell me more, like, what has helped you? Because, throughout actually your career, you've had many roles like what you've just shared, and even more so, especially at NSM, because you're needing to keep track of the entire time zones and different types of projects and keeping track of trends. How do you manage your time and energy?
That's a great question, Monica, and that's something I'm always trying to improve and get better at. I think one key that I try to live by, don't always succeed, but one key is to try to touch things only the number of times they need to be touched, right? So for example, right, if something comes in the queue that is very easy to take care of, or simple, straightforward, right, don't put that off till later if you can take care of that now, right? And so a lot of the PIs that are funded in my program, I think they can appreciate and probably will testify when I'm asked a question, I try to respond rather quickly, and I think sometimes they're surprised how quickly I respond, just because it's not because I don't have other things to do, but it's because I don't want to have to touch it later if it can be resolved now, right? And so being able to kind of and prioritize those things that can be done quickly, I think that's a important skill, right? Getting the easy things done is not particularly challenging, right? That's why they're easy things. But being able to identify, right, what is easier or less challenging than other things, that I think takes a bit of skill. And if you get real adept at it, I think you can save yourself a lot of time. So that's one of my keys to kind of managing time. You also mentioned stress. You know, I manage stress by choosing not to be stressed out, right? Like there's some things that fit in your box, and you should do a good job. And I make it a point to do the best job possible within my capability and capacity to do things as, you know, as good and as best as I can. And I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so people that know me will be like, yeah, that guy, he's a little much, right? And you know, so you know, so I take my responsibilities in my box very, very, very seriously, right? And so you know, there aren't too many things that are in my box that are half done, because I don't believe in doing half work, right? So I operate at a very high level in things that are within my capacity. The things that are beyond my, you know, responsibility, that aren't my decisions to make, I don't stress over those because I can't change those, right? And so knowing where my box ends and where others begin, I think that's important, and accepting that limitation, and then letting others, you know, do their job. I think that's another way I manage stress, right? Because at the end of the day, if I've done all that I can do, I can sleep at night, right? And my sleep is very important because I don't get so much of it. So I can't afford to forfeit any of it. So sleep, you know, that's how I'm able to, you know, when my head is a pillow, I go to sleep. I don't toss and turn, because I know that I've done all that I can and all that I could. And that's what helps me, you know, sleep at night. So that's time, stress, and sleep. That's kind of my keys to my daily existence.
Got it. I'm hearing a lot of intentional boundary setting, which I think is very powerful and impactful. Tell me a little bit more about your leadership style. How would you describe your leadership style? What's your strength? And where's there areas you want to improve?
So I love this question. We could have a whole podcast about leadership. So whenever you want to talk about leadership, like, please have me back. But I'm super enthused by and energized by leadership as its own domain. I mean, I think I read a lot on the topic, and I'm always trying to evolve, not just my understanding, but my practice in that space. And so I you know, I've done a variety of different personality help me, what's the word? You know, personality evaluations, and you know, try to put you in.
Yes.
Give you labels, and so
DISC,
yes, Myers-Briggs, you know,
Strength Finder,
done them, done it. So and I don't want to, you know, I don't want to derail talk about the assessments, because everyone's like, oh, I don't like that one, or oh yeah, I love that one. So you know, I don't want to be divisive, but I will say some of the things that I've picked up from many of them, many of the different assessments, is that I'm a consensus builder. Meaning I try to find, kind of going back to some of my, you know, things I mentioned earlier, right? I try to find common ground. And when leading teams, I try to find what is our shared goal, right? What do we all have, you know, passion around and interest, and what is the overlap space in that Venn diagram, right? So what can we maximize in terms of the things that we all agree on or all think are important? And then, you know, in spaces and scenarios where we don't all necessarily have the same passion, which happens all the time, right? What are things that we can agree on are important, right? And then let's put those goals in front of us, and let's keep those goals in front of all of us, so we're working towards the same scoreboard. Because I find that in some cases, particularly when teams have trouble gelling or working together, it's because people are working on different things. And so having a scoreboard that you keep in front of you and say, hey, this is what we're working towards. You know, are we advancing on this? You know, and putting it back in front of us. That's another, I think, key that I've tried to work into my leadership style, so we can keep the team, you know, unified, whatever that group is, so we're working towards the same ends. And I think a third tentpole or third aspect of that is checking in individually. You know, no matter how big the team is, your team is composed of, you know, hopefully persons, right? And so those persons all have constraints,
Yeah.
interests, things that are going on outside of that team, things that are internal challenges or struggles or excitements that they have, and understanding where your teammates are individually sometimes can help you come upon outsized opportunities in terms of motivating them or incentivizing them or encouraging them. And so I make it a point to check in with people individually, because they're not just members of the team, they're people. And people have other things going on beside just what you're working on together. And so understanding those, one, helps you build rapport, but two, it also helps you understand what is occurring with them, right? And maybe they can't contribute at a certain level because of this thing. And if you could help them with that thing, maybe they can even become a better teammate, right? And so you never know what you find out, but sometimes you find out the keys towards helping your team become more successful, because that person can now be fully present and engage and bring their gifts to the table in a way in which they weren't able to previously. So time spent on doing orthogonal things that benefit your teammates, sometimes those things can be crucial to the success of your actual team.
Absolutely. And speaking of recognizing the value of individuals and different people contribution, going back to one of the big themes of mentorship that we brought earlier, would like to revisit, because you also spend a lot of time outside of that to give back to communities and are part of both formal and informal mentoring programs. Tell me over a little bit more. I think it's not a surprise. Many of us are aware that there's a lack of representation in STEM, and many are trying to address that effort. What's kind of what's the cause of it? Like, what can we do to address it? And tell me your thoughts on that whole topic.
Yeah. I think a lot about this topic, Monica. In my work, right? We mentioned earlier, right?
Yeah.
Accessibility and inclusion. This is one of Director Panchanathan's focuses and drives. And so it's an aspect of the work at NSF, right? Globally, not just mine. I mean, the agency, right? How do we drive inclusion and access, right, to the scientific enterprise? I think about a lot of my personal life. I'm an African American male, and it's not uncommon for me to be the only African American in many spaces that I'm in, right? It's a reality, and I also do a lot of volunteer work, right, in this space, in terms of creating opportunity for others that may not be present or are present in an underrepresented status. So I think I have a lot of thoughts on this one, but I will exercise restraint and maybe just share a couple of thoughts.
Yes, please,
and one is, I think we have to be specific about what we're talking about, right? And so scientific method, right? I'm a scientist, right? And maybe one big part of the scientific method is state the problem, right? And so if you state a problem that is innocuous, that is undefined or ill-defined, and is not clear, then your chances of solving that problem are very small, right? And so we have to be specific about what we're talking about. So questions like, well, how do we increase the number of underrepresented? Okay, what are you talking about, right? I mean, are you talking about Latino? Are you talking about African American? Are you talking about Pacific Islanders? Or, what are you talking about, right? And so being specific around what population, what group we're trying to improve the representation of, right? That's a big piece, right? And so just minority. I'm not even a fan of that word. I don't like that word. I don't use that word for many other reasons. But that as a label is so broad, it's not very helpful. Right. And so we have to be specific about who we're talking about. That's one. And then two, I think you also have to be specific about, like, well, who are we talking about doing something, right? Who's doing something, right? So persons that maybe are underrepresented, or are we talking about persons that, maybe represent decision-making bodies within the larger infrastructure? And so I think on the side of persons that are on the decision-making side, I think one thing that we can do and we need to do is we have to stop treating underrepresentation like it's an unsolved problem, in the sense that there are no examples of progress. I mean, it's not true, right? We have many different examples of how persons and groups that are quote unquote underrepresented have become, a larger portion of the population, right? And so, for example, we're talking about we're in Black History Month, right?
Yes.
So talking about African Americans, right? We have many examples of institutions that increase and produce African Americans that participate in STEM
Mm-hmm.
at amazing rates, and those institutions are called HBCUs, historically Black college universities. They're 3% of the population of
Wow.
our American universities and colleges, but they produce somewhere on the range of 20 to 25% of the bachelor's degree holders that are African American in STEM. Right, that is an amazing statistic, right? And so, they're doing a lot of different things that are very helpful, right? So we need to, consider those things, and I think many institutions do, but we have to stop treating like it's an unsolved problem. And then, secondly, and there's also a lot of institutions that aren't HBCUs that are doing some amazing things that have taken things from the HBCU model and then implemented those at a majority institution, right? I think UNBC, the Meyerhoff Scholars Program, phenomenal program, right? And there's several others that are replicating those in majority institution environments. So I think stop treating it like it's an unsolved problem and we don't have any, really good examples of how to do it at scale. I think we actually do have some, right? And so we also have to appreciate that the implementation is specific. And so what works for the goose does not necessarily work for the gander. So there's no one size fits all solution, but there are many examples that we can utilize, that we can learn and piece together solutions, right? And so we do this with science all the time, right? We don't think that because this works for magnesium, so this is always going to work for every other metal, right? We don't anytime we talk about science, we don't talk about that level of generalization. So I think we need to not talk about that, not use that level of generalization or generalizable, solutions to scenarios of underrepresentation, and that's on the side of majority institutions, right? Or and majority agencies and situations like that. But I think on this other side of persons that may hail from underrepresented populations, I think one key is to appreciate and understand that your mentors, they may not look like you, and that's okay. And that's okay, right? And so if you're, don't wait to find someone that, well, he looks like me or she looks like me, so I can do this. Don't get me wrong. Being able to see yourself in the role is important. I'm not discounting that, but to start and to get into a field and get into an area where you're underrepresented in terms of maybe your group, however you might identify yourself, then chances are the persons that you identify initially will not look like you. That's why you're come from a group that's underrepresented. So being able to appreciate that and realize that and accept that is good and is important, because getting in to a space is costly, and there's some other challenges to being the first in a space, but understanding that those that mentor you initially, they may not look like you and they may not have the same life experiences, but that's okay, because if you're willing to stick it out, then you might be able to be the person that does look like the next person that comes along, and their interest might be a little bit easier, a little bit less challenged, and the inertia might not be as high for those that come after you.
That is so powerful, and I love the thoughtfulness, and I hear the science and the data that you're sharing with us to keep in context, which is so important. Building on that, to celebrate Black History Month, one of the questions I have asked all my guests this month, so that we do all a better job as listeners and participants too, introduce us to new people that we can learn from. So could you do shout outs of 3 innovators who you, they can be in science, they can be in different fields, but like who happen to be Black innovators that you would recommend us all to learn about? And I'll double check with you after the show so that I have the correct spelling so we can put it in the show notes. But could you shout out 3 people that we should all learn from who happen to be Black innovators?
Oh, wow.
It's not just this month. So we can continue to learn from them.
Wow. Okay. So this is a very, very good question. Wow. That is, that's powerful. So I do have some. And so, one, Chris Emdin. He is a professor, and I think he's out of New York, but he's written several books. A book that he just wrote, or a book that he wrote recently that I've just finished devouring, I think last year, is called Ratchedemic. And in it, he presents a new model of education, particularly STEM education and engagement for young people, that is based upon not only cultural relevance, but also being very, very, I won't say not just creative, but being very, very intentional in terms of the pedagogy utilized, right? And unlocking creativity as opposed to encouraging rote memorization. He has many other different thoughts, but that's just kind of a soundbite, a piece. That he's prolific. Another person that I would encourage, and this is not STEMs explicitly,
Yeah.
but it is education.
Uh-huh.
And he writes a lot about the educational experiences of African Americans in this country, and puts it in a context that I think is so powerful. His name is Jarvis Givens. He's a professor at Harvard University, and he's written a book I'm reading now. Actually, it's called Fugitive Pedagogy, and he talks about the educational expectations as well as educational advancements of African Americans, and how through history, actually African Americans have been very devoted to education. So much so, they did it at the expense of their lives in many cases. And so he talks about that, and he puts it in the context of Carter G. Woodson. And then actually the third person I would recommend is a historical figure. So those first two are contemporary persons. The third person is actually I think Carter G. Woodson. He was African American. He's long since been gone, but he pioneered Black History Month, which was initially called Negro History Week. And so he did a lot of things, and he was actually probably one of the most well-educated African Americans of his day. He spoke 3 different languages: German, Spanish, English, and one other language. But he went to Harvard. I mean, he taught in the Philippines. He was was the son of slaves, and so he did amazing things. He had a lot to say about the educational system and how we could be successful in terms of educating all the population, not just those that maybe had the opportunity to be educated, right? Pre Civil War. And so he's another person I think is worth looking into and worth learning about, because he had a lot of critiques, but he also had a lot of thoughts to offer around education and how understanding your culture and your place in history impacts your ability to not just learn, but see value in what you're learning, and drive you right towards becoming a contributor of knowledge to a greater enterprise. So those are the 3 persons that I would offer for the audience to consider and to look at and to view their writings and to look more into, because I think not only they have very, very important, impactful things to say, I think the lives they live themselves are tremendous examples of what not just can be, but how you mix your passions with your profession to produce something that's not just culturally relevant, but beneficial to the community and to all.
That's so inspiring. We're definitely going to make sure we have the correct spelling. So folks, again, who's listening, you'll probably be able to find the show notes, come to our website, or if you get lost, just simply ask info@innovatorsbox.com. So we make sure that you get to learn who these 3 individuals are, including Jonathan. So now you have 4 people to get a chance to learn from. We covered a lot of different grounds, Jonathan. Time has already passed so much. Thank you so much for being here, sharing your story, inspiring us all and what we can and cannot do. I think I'm going to remind ourselves about the importance of communication, common ground. Any other final words of wisdom that you want to share with the innovators out there, no matter where they are?
I do. And that's the thought that when we find things that we're passionate about, oftentimes we may think that I enjoy doing this thing, but I can never make a living at it. And some people say, hey, this is the thing I like, so I'm going to figure out how to do it and forget everything else. I just want to encourage, the audience and the listeners to think about marrying your passion with your profession, but doing it in a way in which your passion is able to intersect even traditional roles, right? And so, even if you as a innovator, maybe your role and your employment is not a traditional role, that's fine. I want to encourage everyone to think about how the things that you're passionate about can have an intersection with kind of the established infrastructure on many different things. And so I've found a way to be able to bring in my passion around education and science and access to underserved populations with my role as a program director, because these are goals of the agency at large. And so it's important to have persons that are passionate about things that are also parts of larger systems, so that that passion can be inserted and realized in those larger systems. Because if we don't bring passion to places that are already existing, then the chances for those existing places to change and evolve is sometimes very, very small. So I just want to encourage everyone to remember your passions, but also think about how you can utilize your passion, not just to do something different, but to influence existing infrastructures, because they need passion and they need people.
So important. Find your passion, think about all the different skills, work on it, remember the quality. What's the best way, Jonathan, that people can follow up with you and learn and stay in touch with you?
Yeah, so I am on LinkedIn, but I also am a program director, so I don't give out my name and my phone number too willy-nilly. But the NSF website, www.nsf.gov, is a great place to find out more about NSF, and you can find me there, particularly if our interest match, and you have a technical interest. But I'm also available via LinkedIn as well. So love to connect. And obviously, I think I've shared some things that I'm passionate about. And so if we have shared interests, shared goals, would love to work with you.
Love it. Love it. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining here. I'm so glad we can have you. Thank you, folks, for tuning into another episode. We will see you next week with another story. So thank you so much. I'll see you later. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode at Curious Monica. I'm your host and executive director of the show, Monica King, founder and CEO of Innovators Box. And a little love shout out to our team who made this show possible for you today. From Innovators Box Studios, audio engineering and producing,
Sam Waymard.
Audio engineering assistants,
Ravi Ladd.
Website and marketing support,
Cree Pandey.
Graphic support,
Leah Orsini.
Christine Eribal.
Original music by Innovators Box Studios, and executive producing, writing and editing, and interviewing and all that jazz by me, Monica King. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Please send us a note for any feedback and suggestions and questions that you have at info@innovatorsbox.com. Have a wonderful day and see you soon.